This is something that is familiar to all of the judges in the room. Why don't CRs have to learn about this also? We all have to talk about roses. We all need to use the correct terminology and names for the parts of a rose. This is the dismal picture that is in our manual. We'll do better as we go along. This is a better picture, same parts, but at least it looks like a rose. Starting at the bottom and working our way up, roots. Roses have two kinds of roots, anchor roots and feeder roots. The big, thick, heavy ones that go down in the soil are your anchor roots, and the name describes their general purpose, which is to anchor the bush. Remember, a rose is only a shrub with attitude. So shrubs have these big, thick roots to hold them straight up and down when the wind blows. That's the idea. It's these little hairy jobs that go off sideways. They're about 2 inches to 10, maybe 12 inches under the soil, depending on the looseness of your soil, the friability of the soil. Those are the ones that do all of the active work. Those are feeder roots. They absorb the nutrients that are dissolved in the water that is in the soil. So, of course, you took your soil class and your water class. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Dissolved minerals in the soil to make nutrients for the rose. At the very tips of the feeder roots, right about here, not very much closer to the hub of activity, is where the mycorrhiza are most active. Now, we have mycorrhiza in our soils. They're native California mycorrhiza. If you go to the store and buy the little package of mycorrhiza and you sprinkle it around, you start a war because, you know, Mother Nature, it's a jungle out there, and they try to kill each other off because the natives are going to defend their territory against the invaders, etc. Why not just cultivate your native mycorrhiza? They are there. They do good things. One of the really neat things they do, when you water, and you get water into the soil and the minerals in the soil start dissolving, the mycorrhiza are trying to soak them in. And meanwhile, the rose needs them. Now, there's no brains involved. This is evolution. The rose root tips ooze out a little bit of their carbohydrates as a simple syrup or a glucose, very, very small amount, which feeds the mycorrhiza, and in return they yield the soluble minerals back to the rose, and the rose takes it away. Symbiosis. It's a good thing. So you want mycorrhiza? You want to know what they look like? Carl, I'm not answering questions yet. Yep. This is what they look like. Here you've got a root mass down in the soil. Of course, this isn't a rose. It's a better picture. Flat up against glass in the lab, okay? All that fuzzy stuff and the nodules and the knots going on are colonies of these mycorrhiza fungi. That's what they would look like if you went underneath, pulled the soil down on top, opened your eyes, and you looked at the roots of your rose. Don't try it. Stems of roses are called canes. The canes on the rose grow just like trees. If you put a mark on the cane at a certain point, like a foot above ground, after the rose grows 6 feet tall, that mark is still at 1 foot. Not like people, where when we grow things stretch as we go up. Does not happen in the plant world that way. The canes at the active growing tip have meristem tissue. It's almost embryonic. Almost, not quite. There are subtle differences. Baldo, quiet. Okay, meristem tissue has the ability to actually form other kinds of tissue. So that at the tip of the rose stem, as it's growing, down where these parts are branching off are little imminent buds. It's actually able to form more buds for more stems, buds for the parts of flowers, buds for the prickles, buds for anything necessary. And in the root, exactly the same. At the very tip of each of the roots and rootlets is meristem tissue, called the root cap, but that's what keeps expanding and growing. And as it does, moving out to the side as it goes down, 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 then root hairs start developing, and away we go into a root. Primary meristems. These are the tissues that will become something. Something. And it all, remember, comes from the little seedling as it's coming up. It's got everything it needs as a seedling to become a full-grown rose. Nothing has to be added except your tender, loving care. Or you can ignore it and it'll grow anyway. Stems have a lot going on in them. They have thick walls, keeps the rose straight up and down, or gently sideways, wherever it's going. Thick walls so that it won't bend, flop, kink, etc. Some roses have more than others. You'll notice that it says the thick walls are stiffened with lignin. Woody ornamentals have lignin in the cellular walls of the stem on the outside, okay? You'll see these if you inadvertently are clipping a stem and you did not sharpen your secateurs, and when you clip it off, there's threads left. Those threads are a little tougher than other parts of the stem, and that's what you're seeing, and that's about all you're going to see of that particular substance. It's not a big deal in most of our roses because we prune them back, and the rose is continually renewing itself, so the stems are actually more or less juveniles. But some of you have roses that have been in the ground for 50 or so years, and you have older stems, and you'll notice that they're starting to look as if they belonged to a tree or one of the hardy ornamental shrubs. They actually have a thickened gray bark, and stuff flakes off, and they don't produce buds anymore, and they're tough, and if you do a cross section, you actually see growth rings. You know, roses can go on and on and on and on and on and on and on until they die of thirst or are run over by your brother-in-law's pickup truck or something like that. But they're hardy, they're tough. In the stem, there is a one-way system. It's called the xylem. In the xylem, everything is going up. So this is the elevator that will take those soluble nutrients from the soil up the cane, out through the stems, into the leaves to the very end to feed every part of the rose. Always going up. Water is in there. Water going up. Minerals is in there. Minerals going up. Doesn't come back that way. There's another ring of tissue called phloem, and in phloem you've got a two-way street. No lignin in these walls. These are softer and they're meshy under a microscope. They have, like, between each cell is a very thin membrane, and it's like a strainer. There are holes in it, or a colander, so things can go back and forth and back and forth. If you want to get into physiology, which we're not doing today, we can talk about osmotic pressure and things like that, and you'll be bored to death. When I say pH, then you can give the definition. Other than that, nothing, okay? So, phloem, it goes up and down. Water and food, up and down. Water, up and down. Food, up and down. This is the system that will move food back down into the roots. And where are they going in the roots? Into those big anchor roots, because those are nutrient sinks. It means it's a refrigerator underground. It's because the rose evolved in a northern temperate forest kind of environment where it snowed and frosted and etc. They lost all their leaves and they had to go dormant back in the old days, much before any of us. Food went down into the anchor roots, was stored, and in spring came back up to start the new growth. And you'll notice remnants of this type of activity even today when your roses come out of their semi-dormancy that we have in California. The foliage is purple and wine-colored and dark. It's not green, usually. There are a few that do that. But normally it's not green. And why not? It doesn't have any chloroplasts in it. No chlorophyll has been made yet. Just nutrients and tissue, and it has to get the sunlight to start making the chloroplasts so that we can get going and making more food. This is what it was like in the old times for roses. Okay. Something to think about. Oh, I already answered that. Do the roots have xylem and phloem? What do you think? Would a root have to have phloem?
Yes.
Because the food has to trickle down. Yeah, and does it have to have xylem? Yes, because water has to go up with minerals in it. So yes, same kind of stuff. And does the root have primordium tissue? Can it make buds? The roots? Where do those root hairs come from? Buds. And roots branch. How does it branch? Buds. So yes, it has primordial meristem tissue at the root cap and up the sides to make the buds, to make the laterals.
Isn't that suckers?
And that's where suckers can come from. Yes, they can. And you know, I usually tell my Master Gardener classes, that roots have eyes on them just like potatoes. Then they get it, you know, because then they know that a sucker can come. Good man. Okay. Prickles. Prickles emerge from the dermis of the cane. They do not come from any other tissue, just from the very skin, the first layers. And they can be any color, yellow, brown, gray, purple, red, green. I haven't seen any black ones unless it was dead. But anyway, they are great for identifying which kind of rose this is, because each rose has only certain kinds of prickles. Some roses will have different ones when the wood is immature, but when it matures, it has mature prickles. Other roses will lose their prickles as they age. It's another one of those things you can do to identify your rose. If you use the field sheet that is usually given out by Heritage Roses, you can document it, each one of the roses in your garden, and it will tell you what it does, and you'll always be able to recognize it somewhere else if it does these things. Very interesting. Straight, hooked, winged like terracantha. Some are very thick, some are very thin, some are curved up, some are curved down. Okay. They are spinose structures, or spinos, whichever way. Very hard with sharp, stiff ends. And we think, and evidence rather supports it, that they evolved in most of the shrubs that have them so that animals wouldn't eat the plant material. In Rosemary's case, she learned that that doesn't matter. Her animals ate the plant material anyway because she had goats and they loved those things. Okay, now, we always say that they're prickles, not thorns. Thorns come from shoots which arise from a bud. We're back to primordial tissue again, meristem tissue, that will make a bud and it will form a thorn. Roses don't have that because we've already stated the prickles come from just the dermis, not from buds. Spines evolved from leaves, wrapped up, and they'll have a vascular bundle in them. We'll get to what that is. They've got a circulatory system inside of the spine. Roses don't have spines, no vascular bundle in the prickles. Prickles are derived from the epidermis, and since they don't have a vascular bundle, there's nothing holding them onto that stem, and that's why you can so easily just snap them off with your thumb. And it does not harm the rose. Okay. Leaves. Leaves also develop ultimately from buds in the meristem tissue. Rose leaves are pinnate. That means that the leaflets are opposite each other. They're not staggered like this, like some of the ferns that we know. They're directly opposite each other with a terminal leaflet. Terminal leaflet, leaflet, leaf margin at the top. We often refer to that as the blade. That's not its name. It is a stipule, and it's what holds the leaf on the stem. And the stipule has two auricles on the end, developmental tissue that's left over. They also can be used to identify what this rose really is. Every rose, the auricles are slightly different. Some are straight, some curl, some flex down, some flex up, some curl in, some are short, some are longer. Very unusual looking thing that you just don't notice, but you will now. Look at those when you're looking at roses. Okay. Leaf shapes. I got this one from Barbara Gordon. Rose leaflets can be oval or ovate. That means a little fatter at one end than the other. Elliptical, lanceolate, like this one here, you know, or linear, long. Some of the old garden roses have a whole bunch of linear leaflets. They almost look fern-like. It's very strange to see them. Interesting. Most roses have just those shapes, but they certainly can have a lot of leaflets, and always in odd numbers. It's not just fives like our modern roses. They can come 7s, 9s, 11s, 13s, 15s, 17, 19, and then...
Per stem. Per stem.
Per stem, yes. And as I said, the old garden roses that have all of the little linear leaflets, I don't even bother to count them. There's a lot of them. The shape of a leaf can also help to identify what the rose is. No two roses will have the same shape, and if you think you've got moonstone and Cajun moon side by side, and you get suspicious about one of them or the other one, or you run a picture on Facebook and claim it's one thing and it's the other, you might look at the leaves. Look at the leaves, because those two bushes have different leaves. Okay. And what are leaves for? Very important, otherwise they would not have evolved. The leaf is a food factory. This is where the photosynthesis is done. A leaf, this is a cross section, and it was in the CR talk. It's got a skin or a cuticle on the top and on the bottom. And there are little holes called stomata. Each one is a stoma, so that there's gaseous exchange going on all the time. Leaves respire, okay? They don't breathe. Mammals breathe. But leaves, the gas goes in and out. It's a life-threatening situation for the leaves if they get too dirty or impacted and they cannot exchange gas. So wash your roses off every once in a while, because you know water doesn't fall out of the sky in California. You have to do it yourself. Okay. The chloroplasts are in that top very green tissue called dermal tissue or upper epidermis. In those little boxy cells, that's where all the little green chloroplasts are, along with some goopy, colorless stuff called a cytoplasm. And we're not getting into a biology class, so you don't need to know more than that, because again, you'd be very bored. But if you shaved off that top, all the green would go away. Can you think of an insect that does something like that to our leaves? What about a leaf hopper? Leaf hopper will pierce the cell, suck out the cytoplasm and the chloroplasts, leaving a cell that is no color. And that's where you get the stippling effect that a leafhopper does. Looks like little pinpricks, no color where the prick is, because he ate the color. He ate the goody green stuff. They provide shade. If it's too hot, leaves droop, as you know, and then they come back after afternoon in good times, not in our heat waves. But they will shade the skin of the plant, because rose stems can get sunburn if they don't have a little help. So leaves will provide shade. And then they are organs for respiration, which is what they do. That's the gaseous exchange. And transpiration, which is something else that they do. So we will get into that. But I promised you would see what a vascular bundle was. Right here, the veins of the leaves. There's a layer of xylem and phloem in the vein. Here's a smaller vein budding off, xylem and phloem. These are vascular bundles. Roots have them, stems have them, and now leaves have them too. That's how stuff gets moved around. And it's under pressure. Now, not pressure like we think of, but there's a biological pressure to move them. Otherwise, how does water go up? Think about that, because we'll get to that. How does water go up inside of this? Okay, let's go look at photosynthesis. Again, we're not going to do chemistry, so relax. The sun shines, photosynthesis happens, and as photosynthesis is happening, it needs carbon dioxide to run that biological engine. Carbon dioxide from the atmosphere going into the leaf, gaseous exchange through the stoma, okay? Into the cytoplasm, chloroplasts working like crazy to break the carbon bonds, kaboom. When that happens, you've got energy. Energy is taken away by various other molecules. RNA gets involved, and one of the byproducts is oxygen. Used up some of the oxygen, but there was a lot of oxygen left over. Has to get it out of the leaf. Oxygen is a little toxic, so out comes the oxygen. So when the sun is shining and photosynthesis is happening, all of our green forests, all of our farm fields, and our roses are clearing CO2 out and putting oxygen back into the atmosphere. Very nice. Thank you. That's why they sometimes say that the forests and the mucky, swampy stuff with all of the green goops are CO2 sinks. And if we cut down too many of our forests in the jungles, they won't be doing this back and forth with the gaseous exchange, and the oxygen in our atmosphere, the percent is going to change. Humans might be in trouble if they change too far. Okay. Photosynthesis converts the light energy into chemical energy. One of our professors at Berkeley got the Nobel Prize for discovering how it did that and unraveling the whole thing. And I think the neatest thing about Professor Calvin was he drove an old Citroen, and it was swamp water green. He wore Birkenstocks and usually shorts and an old t-shirt and drove a Citroen. Because after all, he was who he was. Okay, the chemical energy stored in carbohydrates like sugars, like glucose. And they were made from carbon dioxide and water. This is the Calvin cycle. It was named for Professor Calvin. He's the one that discovered all of this. Okay, this is a model for the Master Gardener classes I teach, showing the very same thing I just told you. Starting at the left, light falling on the surface of the leaf, the chloroplasts are activated, they start consuming CO2 and water, excreting, well, chloroplasts don't excrete, okay. From the cytoplasm, oxygen is kicked out and carbohydrates. This all happens in the day. Carbohydrates, meanwhile, day and night, are utilized. Oxygen is pulled back in to burn it to make food, and excess water and CO2 is kicked out, leaving energy behind. Energy is needed, is created, is used, is needed, is created, is used. This is respiration. It happens day and night. This is analogous or like breathing for us. But as I said before, plants don't breathe. They respire. It's a cycle, and it's driven through biological pressures and processes. And when chemistry happens in there, it has to balance. And when it doesn't balance, it goes the other way. And when that doesn't balance, it goes the other way. And that's where your cycle comes from. And we're not doing chemistry today. Okay, only cells with chloroplasts carry out photosynthesis. All the rest of the stuff in the leaf is doing something else with the energy. It's either moving food down or moving water up or moving gas around. And the two gases it's moving are CO2 and oxygen. Oh, this is the Krebs cycle. You don't want to know about that. Go ahead. Okay, respiration happens day and night, as said. During the day, it's easier on the plant to move everything around, but it still has to move it around at night when there is no photosynthesis happening. Therefore, stored energy is used, and byproducts of that would be CO2. Okay, glucose is broken down, lets the CO2 and water vapor out. Oxygen is eaten or used during that process. Water vapor coming out of the leaf. There are many, many causes for the water to ooze out of the leaf margins, but you often see it in the early morning if you go out to your plants, especially in spring when the pressure is really high, bringing stuff up from the roots, and you will see little water droplets all along the margins of the leaf. Perfect little pearls. That's called guttation. There's no test, you don't have to remember that. But it is a phenomenon. Water is coming out so fast that the leaf can't just let it vaporize. It's actually forming into liquid and dropping off. Okay. This is a diagram for Master Gardeners of transpiration. This is the other thing that roots get involved in. There's water in the soil. Who put it there? Hopefully you. Again, reminding you atmospheric conditions are not conducive to it falling out of our skies, so you take care of the watering. Watering dampens the soil. In moist soil, minerals that are down there can be solubilized. That means they mix with the water, they either dissolve or a process dissolves them, like what the mycorrhiza do with them, until the nutrients can then go into the root, up the stem, to the leaves and the flowers and etc. Transpiration, it's going up, okay? Water goes on up through and out those leaves, evaporating from the leaf surfaces. It doesn't turn around and come back down that way. Moving on to the flower, this is the part of the rose that we all like. And we need to realize what the names of the parts are. And most of you are judges, some of you are not. The stem there is the peduncle, and then there's what looks like a capsule, and the sepals are attached to it. That's the calyx. The calyx, C-A-L-Y-X. Sepals and that tube are the calyx. Inside of the calyx, as it opens, you'll find the corolla. And the corolla is the petals. I don't know why they don't just call them petals like we do, but botanically it's the corolla. Okay. If you cut open the calyx tube, you will see that there are several ovules in it. Each one will have a chamber at the very bottom where there will be several places to attach achenes, which inside of the achene will be the seed. They're little, like little nuts, you know. They're in there. And the calyx then becomes the hip. There are female parts and male parts inside. Oh, we didn't go fast enough, John. Together, we just didn't go fast enough. Okay, let's go again.
Go backwards?
No, forward, keep going. Okay. Well, I don't know who put this together. It's just ridiculous. Okay. How are the flowers formed? In the primordial tissue, back before it even looked like a flower, the embryonic tissue, a disc forms. And, oh, this is cool. This will get into genetics. This is another thing you don't want to have to be bothered with. The disc forms, and it forms in rings. It's almost like those new printers that print plastic parts, you know? It forms rings. We'll get to the rings. The outer ring is what's going to become sepals, and it makes the calyx. The next ring in will form the corolla, or the petals. The third ring will develop into stamens, and the fourth ring will form the carpels, which is the stigma, style, ovaries, etc. Like this. And why? But it does. And you can actually, oh, how exciting. You can mark gene sequences and follow this. But again, that's genetics. You don't want to do that. Oh dear, still more genetics. I found this interesting. The genetic expression in the floral meristem, how those rings are formed. If you have genes and you've got an A gene, you're going to get sepals in the floral meristem. And if you have an A and a B, you'll get petals. If you have a B and a C, you're going to get stamens. And if you only have a C, you're going to get carpels. That's how it evolved, and that's what happens. Interestingly enough, now if you take archaeology classes and go back when flowered plants first came along, before them we had conifers. Conifers don't do this. This was the invention that led to flowers. So there's only one gene that mutated at some point in time to form carpels, so that angiosperms came along. Another part of science. Okay.
Wait a minute.
Who waited me? Yes.
Are you saying that there's only one gene that does those three things, or there's three genes?
Oh, there's 3 genes that express that in combination with other genes. But way back in time, there were only 2. Somewhere, there was a mutation and a 3rd gene appeared, or a gene further along on the strand activated. Enzymes do strange things. And that's how angiosperms came along, kind of like an accident in time. Sure. Okay, why do roses have petals? We think that it was to attract pollinizers, but that's not true. Pollinizers of roses usually come at night. They're not very romantic. They're beetles and flies and other cute little entomological creatures. But we do have bees also in the day and stuff like that. Petals are kind of like landing stages, and they're there. And if you go along with some theories, and I'm thinking of Michael Pollan right now, roses, when they started out, they had 5 petals. Very simple. Why did they continue and get fluffier, if you will? Perhaps they did it to attract people. There's a certain amount of pressure that farmers, gardeners put on plants, and plants, as they change, again, you know, accidental mutations happen, and if the gardener or the farmer likes the mutation, they keep that and get rid of the other one. And now, it's not, like I said, plants don't have brains. They don't think this through. But there's something going on. And if you get into some of the experimental botany things, I'm thinking of the bit with carrots and tomatoes now, where they almost can talk to each other. Long row of plants, say tomatoes, because you'll be very familiar with tomatoes. Long row. You know, if you bother a tomato, you start getting that smell going. It oozes out tomato stink. Okay? If you take a little stick and you bang up the first one and you bang up the second one and you wait, over a duration of time, the last one in the row is also stinking. They're all stinking. They're putting out this odor to repel. Go away. Stop banging. How did the one on the end know that there was a predator down here? And they told each other, yes. They passed it along. And carrots do similar things. I don't know if they've carried on with the rest of these experiments. I stopped reading by then. But it was interesting. There's something that goes on. It's a united world. Okay? Seeds. We say rose seeds. Roses have seeds. Well, they do have seeds, but the seeds are inside of a coat. And so the whole thing is called an achene. You have to peel the coat off to get to the seed. That's why those of you who propagate from seed, you know, when you harvest them, you have to rough them up a little bit. You get all the gooky stuff off, and if you sandpaper them a little bit or run over them with the car maybe once or twice, it will scratch that coating. And you realize the coating on these seeds is really tough, and it evolved, again, going back to that northern temperate forest, and you've heard me say, along comes the deer and eats the ripe hip, and it goes through the deer and out the other side and has to go through all kinds of winter. It has to be a really tough coating. But finally, it rots enough that it can break open, and by that time it's almost spring, so the seedling can start, and other processes too. You realize this is a very generalized lecture. But if you get interested in any one of the various subjects, start reading about it. It's great stuff. Go ahead. Okay, the male parts on the inside are the filament, which is the stalk that holds up the anther. That whole thing is called a stamen. Filament and anther. The anther looks like that. And it usually is lobed, and if you cut across it, you'll notice little pollen receptacles inside, packed full of pollen grains. When they ripen, you know, when you first pick them, if you're going to propagate, and you save it in a nice dry place, they're whole, but by the next day they've kind of popped and scattered the pollen and it's yellowish all over the container and it's very dry. Those are the pollen grains that pop out. These contain the male sperm of the rose, okay? In the female, the carpels. There are many carpels in a rose. So we're looking at just one carpel. Down in the calyx tube, we have the chamber with the ovules, not ovaries. Mammals have ovaries, plants ovules, okay? Inside the ovules is where the seed or achenes are forming. There is a stigma at the top, which is a very sticky receptacle, a tender part of the plant. And if pollen lands on the stigma at the right time, the pollen itself will form a long tube that goes down, 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 down to where the ovule is going to form. That's where the male and the female gametes take care of themselves. Goes down the pollen tube in the style to the ovule. And roses don't need partners. They can do it themselves. That's if you're going to hybridize and you want the rose to go ahead and form hips, you don't care who the daddy was, that's fine. But if you care, you'll cut off the male parts of the flower to save the female parts. You'll save those male parts and use them on some other female if you're very thrifty. But otherwise, they'll self-pollinate if at all possible. Yeah. So hips, the ripe ovules and seeds. As I say, seeds contain all of the information necessary to form a new plant. One tiny seed has it all. It forms the entire rose. All of the genes in there already know what they need to do. The embryonic tissue is ready to expand. Once you plant it and it gets the first little root tip down, it's off to the races. And a plant forms below the ground with all the root structure, above the ground with the bush. And that's your next generation. So that's it for the botany lecture. We need to take a 10, maybe 15-minute break, and then if you come in then, you will have new sign-up sheets for the next lecture, which is on plant nutrition. Yes, Carl?
Can we ask you a couple of questions?
Maybe. Just a minute.
I don't know. For me, it's a can.
What do you need?
I got the impression that phloem and xylem were beside each other in a stem. I had always thought that one was outside of the other.
They're in rings.
They're in rings.
Yeah, they're in rings.
All right.
Yeah. That's a diagram. Diagrams are cartoons. Okay, next question was here.
Should roses photosynthesize through their stems without leaves?
The green skin will have chloroplasts, that's why it's green. So yes, they can do that. But the leaves are the primary factories for that. They've got everything.
You have to strip the leaves off. You still have some photosynthesis.
You still have some going on, yeah. Dolores?
What makes the prickles form?
What makes the prickles form? A primordial bud on the skin. It's almost like skin tags on people. That's a horrible example. But skin tags are just your normal skin cells that instead of being nice and flat, the tissue stands up. Yeah.
So is that like a nerve?
No, no. No nerves, no xylem, no phloem, no nothing. It's just tissue from the stem that forms into a prickle.
So if you get a plant that puts out consistent blind shoots, is that genetic or is it's not developing that plate? Or?
Many different factors. But if it consistently does it, it probably is genetic in that plant, and you may as well dig it up and grind it. Yeah. Yes.
Can you actually grow a bush from a rose hip?
Can you grow a bush from a rose hip?
Can you start one?
You probably would grow several bushes because one hip can have anywhere from 2 to 100 seeds in it. And it's just like planting seeds. You plant a seed, you could grow a bush if you're lucky. People do it all the time. That's how brand new roses are made that are genetically different from all the rest of them. Not just the same old rose made from a cutting in someone else's yard.
So how deep would you have to plant it?
When we are buying soil conditioner, are we importing foreign mycorrhizae?
Most planting materials have been sterilized, but some of them now will have mycorrhiza added because it's a marketing thing. People went nuts a couple of years ago, and the marketing arm of all of the corporations said, yeah, we can make money off of this. We'll give them dead fungus in there. Now this lady wanted to know how deep you planted the seeds. The rule of thumb for any and all seeds is 1.5 times the diameter of the seed. So if the seed is a little one, just barely under.
Almost all the organic fertilizers in the market, they have mycorrhizae in them, and half of them are made in Humboldt County. Is that local California? Or
Well, it's not local to my yard, but it might be local to yours, and it really doesn't matter. When we get into nutrition, we'll talk about organic and inorganic and etc. That'll be the next topic, but I have to stop and drink a lot of water now before we start again. So be sure you sign for the next lecture if you're going to take nutrition.